For this week's session, I happen to be in Canada's capital city, Ottawa, Ontario. And what we're going to talk about today is what is the financial secret to stable government? Proverbs 29:14. What is the financial secret to stable government? The text says, if a king judges the poor with truth, his throne will be established forever. Or, the King James Version, the king that faithfully judgeth the poor, his throne shall be established forever. So there's a very interesting concept, and that is that how a government treats the poor is the key to its financial stability, specifically justice for the poor. Now, it's interesting that it says, if a king judges the poor with truth or judges the poor faithfully. So it's not just a matter of handouts, it's more of a matter of integrity and justice. And now, leadership is difficult. There's no way around that. Good leadership is very difficult, and you can't please everyone. And if you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. So the question is, how do you judge the poor with truth? And let me say this. According to the text, the treatment of the poor can strengthen or destroy those who are great and powerful, even the king. There is a power higher than both the poor and the king. The higher power is God himself, who, despite having absolute sovereignty, identifies with the poor since God himself has their humble attitude. Amazing. A sovereign God who is humble. And the text says he who judges the poor faithfully, not just with charity, but with justice. The text doesn't say the poor need a handout, they need truth. The word truth is sometimes translated as faithfulness. Good social policies call for just and fair treatment for all people, regardless of their wealth. But why not merely show compassion and give generously to the poor, since they are in need? Simply because a handout can rob the recipient of personal dignity and self respect. As someone has said, a hand up is worth more than a hand out. Treating the poor with truth implies allowing the poor to benefit from their labor, giving them meaningful work and allowing them to receive the full benefit of this work. Now, it's very interesting that our income tax system is, in a sense, a handicap to just treatment of the poor. There is a different taxation system, and the Christian Heritage Party calls it the fair taxation system. It's very interesting, where basically income tax is reduced to zero and people get 100% of the benefits of all their labor. And the government taxes people based upon a sales or consumption tax. So the sales and consumption tax is much more equitable than an income tax, especially a progressive income tax. It's very important to treat the poor in such a way that you don't rob them of their dignity. In other words, giving people a handout without allowing them to contribute any labor or any creative energy or any industry to their income is very, very degrading. Sometimes God uses poverty as a school to train us in valuable life skills, including diligence, respect for authority, proper planning, punctuality, and honesty. Well managed but unwise, misguided government welfare programs can ruin these lessons by letting the poor off the hook too easily. Prolonged government aid, which is not combined with personal effort, indirectly encourages people to be lazy and plead helplessness to justify inaction. In the New Testament, we read, he who does not work, let him not eat. So treating the poor with justice, with fairness, faithfully, with truth, will actually help them in multiple ways rather than just give them a handout. That's very, very important. In the Old Testament, the poor had to glean, that is, collect some assets for themselves. So treating the poor with faithfulness and with truth is the key to a stable financial government. Sadly, this current government that we have in Ottawa right now, it has what I call a very severe case of misguided altruism. They want to save the world, but they're not operating from God's original design. That is to say, the creator of the world has established a moral code into his universe. And if we break that moral code, it has severe consequences on the well-being of our physical environment. And we see this where God will destroy entire nations, entire civilizations, not because of too much carbon being emitted in the atmosphere, but because of how they treat marriage, how they treat sexuality, how they treat one another. And so there is a website, prizetruth.org, that is very important to look at this stage, and specifically tile number 18, because tile 18 deals with an extra biblical piece of justice, and it comes from the land of Samaria, and it predates the Ten Commandments by about 400 years, if I'm correct. And it's the only piece of legal code which we have in its original form. There was a clay tablet. And it says this basically: if a rich man wants to buy land from a poor man, the poor man, number one, is not obligated to sell the land. And number two, the rich man must pay in silver. So there is some protection there for the poor. And early anthropology, that is to say, early mankind, the human race, there were not a bunch of half stupid apes and half intelligent human beings. On the contrary, they were more intelligent than we are now, because God made them, the DNA was perfect. That's why they lived so long. But in addition to that, they're very much aware of God's moral code. And this particular tile number 18 on prizetruth.org is the longest living legal code in existence. It has to do with the treatment of the poor. So, a king that treats the poor with truth, his throne will be established forever. Now, it's significant that every human jurisdiction has collapsed sooner or later, whether it be the Chinese dynasties, Roman empires. The only kingdom that's going to last permanently is that of the Lord Jesus Christ. And that is why it's critical that any jurisdiction, in this case, we're going to look at Ottawa and what made Canada such an enviable place to live in, how Canada became a drawing nation because it was beautiful in how it had law and order established in our nation. So, what is the financial secret to stable government? A king, a government that judges the poor with truth, that judges the poor faithfully, their throne will be established forever. Good government survives or is destroyed based upon how well it treats the poor, not the rich, because they can curry favor, they can bribe officials, but it's the poor who have nothing to give. So that the leader has to be aware of a higher power to which the leader is accountable and treat the poor properly. And God is pleased with that kind of government. So we can't please everyone, but if we please God with how we rule, how a nation rules, then that will be the best solution to the populace. It won't always be comfortable, but it will always end up well. You know, children prefer candies to carrots, but a wise parent, good leadership, looks for long-term health, not just short-term pleasure. I have a recent example of the Canadian government wanting to treat the poor wrongly, and that has to do with the Omnibus Bill, Bill C-69, and it targets the people who are blind, believe it or not. The Canadian Bar Association of Tax Lawyers are calling for a certain clause to be removed from Bill 69, citing its unfair targeting of the blind. Basically, what it does is this particular government bill from the government of Canada in the early summer of 2024 would be denying the blind of 50% of the deductions for essential equipment purchases. These are specific devices, synthetic speech systems, Braille printers, large print on-screen devices. They're required by the blind, but the government would be denying them financial benefits for this equipment. So that's a very specific current example of how unwise government is attacking the poor. And in a sense, by attacking the poor, it's going to lead to their own demise. So again, the ancient biblical counsel is always in effect. It's evergreen. It's always powerful. Abide by it and prosper it, break it and suffer the consequences. And we are praying the Canadian government would come to its senses and treat the poor with justice and fairness. That's what would cause the government to stand. That's what's helped Canada in the past.